Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. On Monday night, the AP Top 25 came out, okay? And we're not going to spend any time really talking about the AP Top 25. The only real difference between the AP and the coaches poll, unfortunately, we're not going to get a number 1 versus number 2 matchup, Texas and Ohio State in week 1. That's because Ohio State is week 3 in the AP poll. They're number 2 in the coaches poll, whatever. But top 3, Texas, Penn State, Ohio State, okay? But I'm not really going to talk coach AP poll because we did that already a few days ago. And if you missed any of it, you can go back and check it out. Who I think is overrated, who I think is underrated, all that good stuff. Well, I bring it up because there was one thing that caught my attention in the AP poll, and it might not be surrounding a team that you would expect. A lot of SEC teams in that top 25. By the way, a lot of big SEC games in week 1. I mentioned Texas at Ohio State, LSU at Clemson, Bama, who we just talked about, at Florida State. One game that might not totally be on the radar, though, Toledo at Kentucky in week 1 in a game that, forget Kentucky. Like, Mark Stoops needs a great season, not just a great game against Toledo, but a great season. Well, I bring it up because the AP poll dropped on Monday. My buddy Drew Franklin from Kentucky Sports Radio was one of many Kentucky media members and fans to bring up a very interesting point from that poll. That note, that fact is this. In the first AP poll, Toledo got more preseason AP votes than the University of Kentucky, their week 1 opponent. Let me just say this. Mark Stoops has said he is motivated this offseason. Mark Stoops has claimed things are going to be different this coming season. If he needed any motivation to get his team fired up, this should be it. Toledo as a MAC team getting more respect in the preseason AP poll than the team that they are playing from the SEC in week 1. Okay, so let's dive into it. Should mention, by the way, as you can see on the screen, as always, make sure you're following our Torres on UK account, Torres on UK, for all of your late-breaking Kentucky sports news, Torres on UK on Twitter. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into this because to me, this is fascinating, and let me do a couple caveats right out of the way, right? So first of all, I understand the AP poll. One, it means nothing, right? We see every year, Florida State was a top 10 team in the AP poll a season ago. Finished not only unranked, but they were one of the worst teams in the Power 4 in all of college football. By the way, in defense of Mark Stoops, there's been plenty of years where Kentucky hasn't been ranked in the AP poll and end up at winning 8, 9, 10, 11 games, not 11, but 8, 9, 10 games and finishing the season in the AP poll. So one, it ultimately means nothing. 2, I also understand that, Kentucky's path over a 12-game season is much more difficult than Toledo's. And so Toledo's path to a much better win-loss record is obviously much more manageable. And lastly, I'll say this, credit where it's due. Toledo's a really good team that has given power conference teams trouble in the past. For people who have not paid attention, for people who do not know, this is the same Toledo team that a year ago went to Mississippi State, beat Jeff Lebby's Mississippi State Bulldogs, and actually, frankly, beat them pretty good, right? They also return about as much as really, I can't sit here and say they return as much as any group of 5 team, but we all know the struggles that group of 5 teams have to retain talent in their programs in this NIL portal era. Well, I don't know if Toledo has some sort of booster club that's better than the rest of the MAC or what. They return a ton of talent, and they actually bring in a ton of talent. Tucker Gleason, probably the most accomplished quarterback in the MAC, returning. He's a guy that I think is getting some preseason MAC Player of the Year buzz, 24 touchdowns a year ago. They have one of the best wide receiver rooms in the MAC. I think it's also worth noting they got a pretty good running back too. Does the name Chip Trainum ring a bell to any Kentucky fan listening to this? Well, he was at Kentucky a year ago, played at Arizona State, played at Ohio State, was at Kentucky a year ago. Well, now he is at Toledo. And I'm sorry, it didn't work out at Kentucky, but if you're good enough to play at Ohio State, you're good enough to play at Kentucky, you're a dude that you can tote the football, you can tote the rocks. So I just bring it up because I get that Toledo is a talented team, is a tough week one matchup. But like I was saying a minute ago, if Mark Stoops didn't have any bulletin board material heading into week one, I think this is it. And I'll just say in general, I think Kentucky is just, to me, one of the more fascinating teams in all of Power Conference football, because I don't think they were quite as bad as the record showed last year. I do think they have a chance to be better. The question is, will they actually get there once the season begins? In defense of Mark Stoops, a lot of changes in the offseason. It's interesting. We had Vince Morrow on the show, who is now at Louisville. Clearly, there was a disconnect between those two sides. I love Coach Morrow. I'm gracious for his time. But, I bring it up because there was change on the coaching staff. Mark Stoops, I don't know if it's to his credit, but in his, in his argument, they were very specific about the guys that they brought in through the portal. Maybe got rid of some guys that maybe weren't great locker room guys. Maybe did bring in some guys, especially along both defensive line or along both lines, that are going to have an impact and allow Kentucky to play in the manner that they want. O-line, the kid from New Mexico State, who everybody loves, who's an incredible quote. I don't have his name off the top of my head, but that is a kid that should have a major impact. David Gusta, the transfer from Washington State on the defensive line. By the way, big day for Washington State transfers here on the Aaron Torres pod today, okay? But I just bring it up because the lines have been bolstered. They've always been able to run the ball for the most part. Last year, listen, I'm not going to put it all on one guy. Brock Vandagriff did turn the ball over a lot, though. And so can Zach Calzada just be a guy that takes care of the football, that does not make the mistakes that Brock Vandagriff did a year ago? By the way, Shazia Pete, I believe, is his name. My eyes are just so bad right now. I apologize. I'm getting old. But the kid from New Mexico State, Shazia Pete, I believe, is the name of the kid that I was referencing. But I bring it up because Zach Calzada, he said this week, I'm comfortable if you want to call me a system quarterback. My job is to make plays, to get the ball out of my hands, to get it to running backs, to get it to wide receivers. And so can Zach Calzada just take care of the football better? Can they run the ball more consistently? Because if they can, that defense was still pretty good last year. It wasn't what it had been. It wasn't what it was during the best years of the Stoops era. But part of the reason it wasn't what it was during the best years of the Stoops era is because the offense was so bad and the offense kept turning the ball over and giving it back to the other team. And so at the end of the day, the Kentucky defense was still pretty good, top 30 or so nationally in scoring defense. It didn't help that the other team that the offense kept giving the ball away. So they are a fascinating team. I saw Luke in the chat to start the show asked about the Ole Miss game early in the season. I will say this. I do think, to Luke's point, that is as important of a game for a tone setter as you can have if you're Kentucky. Because, listen, I think if you're Mark Stoops, you got to get back to a bowl game. You got to get back to respectability. Well, Ole Miss coming in week 2. Austin Simmons, I know he got the start, or he played a series or two against Georgia last year, but that's obviously going to be his first SEC road start. So can you get Kroger Field rocking? Can you have it ready to go? And can you, get that game against Ole Miss, a team, by the way, that you beat? You take care of Ole Miss. I think to Luke's point earlier in the show, you take care of Ole Miss. The schedule certainly doesn't get any easier, but all of a sudden you take care of Ole Miss, you can see that pathway to 6 wins. So I do think there's something to be said about that being one of the most important games on the schedule. You beat Ole Miss, you probably start 3-0 before you get into the heart of SEC play. It gets much tougher from there. I think there's 6 wins on the schedule. But like I said, part of it is you have to use this as motivation. The voters have said that coming into the season, they believe Toledo is better than you. Go ahead and prove them wrong. Mark Stoops says that he is motivated. It is now time for him to prove it, and it is time for his team to do the same.